This is Wisconsin Eye coverage of the April 3 election for a 10-year term on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Today we're interviewing Milwaukee Judge Rebecca Dallet, who is one of three candidates, been on the bench for 10 years. Your Honor, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
What's at stake in this election, and why are you the most qualified?
Well, we're at a time right now, Steve, where our rights are under attack, our values, things we care about the most, things like clean air and water, equal protection under the law, women are under attack, and we've got a Supreme Court that's broken. And what we need right now is someone with the values and experience to step up and repair that court. And I've been working in our courts now for more than 20 years, really fighting to protect our rights, and I want to continue that fight on our Supreme Court.
Explain the term, our court is broken, please, Your Honor.
Well, when we have special interest money pouring into our state to buy justice or a justice, and then we had in the John Doe case that special interest money sitting as a party in front of that case, in front of Justice Gableman, and he refused to recuse himself or remove himself from that case, despite the fact that $2.25 million had been spent on his campaign by a party in that case. I think that's a symptom of a broken system.
So what would be your rule if X party or X individual or X law firm before the court gave X amount, would you step off a case, Your Honor?
Well, we need to have a meaningful recusal rule. We don't have that right now. And we need to have a hearing to talk about what that rule looks like. And I know we did have a number of judges, retired judges, bring forward a petition this past spring to have a hearing. The Supreme Court refused to even hold a hearing on the issue. We need to start with that, talk about what's meaningful, what makes sense, but it's about restoring confidence back to our public that our courts is doing the work that it needs to do.
What should be the dollar trigger if a party gave $1,000, $5,000, $10,000? A judge who was a recipient of that should step off? What's your idea of an amount? Excuse me.
Well, I know that $2.25 million is too much, but I do think we need to talk about it. I think the proposal from the judges was $10,000. And maybe that's the number that works, but whatever that is, we need to have a meaningful rule so that everyone understands it and so that the public can have confidence that the court is fair.
If you're elected to the court and absent any formal rule on the issue, what rule will you adopt in terms of when to step off a case?
Well, and I am a judge now, as you mentioned, for almost a decade, and I do want to be fair. And not only what I think is fair, but what it looks to be fair. So a good example of that is my husband's an attorney who works for a firm. He doesn't litigate cases in the courtroom, but I make it a practice of stepping off of all the cases that his firm sits on so that it doesn't look unfair. And so I think that the best we can do is make sure that everyone believes that they're going to get a fair shake, and they should get a fair shake in our court system.
Should justices give a reason when they step off a case? Because right now, as you know, they don't have to.
Well, I give a reason now. I could see circumstances where the reason could be something general, depending on what the nature of it is. But if it was a personal matter or something like that, you could state that. But I think it's just important that we have a meaningful rule so that the public has confidence in our courts.
If there is a pending ethics complaint against a justice, there's no provision for any other justice to step in. And so we saw it in the case of Justice Prosser, it was never resolved. How should pending cases, if other justices step off, be resolved?
Well, right now, we would have to do some work on that. The issue now is when someone does step off, we can't just fill it with someone else. And that's something that perhaps the legislature would have to address, or we could amend with constitutional amendment. That's something that I think the court would just have to look to. But again, I just think it's about fairness. Our third branch is there to be a check on our other two branches, and it can't possibly do that when it's really looking out for its own political allies, when justices are looking out for that instead of looking out for the people of our state.
If donations are so corrosive, what limits have you put on donations to your own campaign?
Well, we have to distinguish here. What we're talking about is this special interest money. They call it even dark money that pours in from out of state. I don't have any connection with that, and I'm not about that in any way. Mm-hmm. What we do as candidates is we need to communicate with people. And I have made it every attempt, and I'm still doing it, to travel across our state and meet with as many people as I possibly can, shake as many hands. And I've gotten support across the state. I've got over 350 elected officials, including 175 judges, and a lot of local community leaders, and meeting with day-to-day people. But the reality is we have to communicate. And in order to do that, the campaigns have to raise money. But it's people's participation in that process and their right to participate in that process that we're also protecting.
Have you said no PAC money? Have you sent back any donations that you consider potentially tainted?
Well, I don't have any PAC money right now, and frankly, I'm as the judicial candidate, not keeping the track of the, the day-to-day money is from donors. It's from everyday donors, and I would say that right now we don't have any political, no PAC money. I think we're over 1,500 individual donors, which I'm proud of. It shows the great strength we have in the campaign. It shows the support we have across the state, and it's participation, and some of those donations are very small and some are more, whatever people feel that they want to contribute. But it's too bad we have to do that. We did have a time when we had
public finance
we had
option.
Public finance option. That's terrific. I'm all in favor of that, but that's not the case right now. So we're just trying to communicate with people and get the message out about my experience and values.
You seek a nonpartisan office, but you and Mr. Burns spoke to the State Democratic Convention, and Judge Skronik is getting some help from the Republicans. Is it really a nonpartisan office anymore?
Well, it is a nonpartisan office. I think there's a distinction.
Do you consider yourself a Democrat?
I consider myself a judge, and I think that's important, but I have values, and I'm happy to share those values, and those values are important. And so when we talk about putting the next person on the Supreme Court, I will tell people what those values are, and I talked about a couple of those in the opening. I mean, I cared a lot about our beautiful state and what has happened, and I care about our environment, clean air and water, our public schools, working people, making sure everyone's treated fairly under the law. But that's different than what Mr. Burns is doing, which is taking positions on cases, and that is a problem. And he's not a judge, so he doesn't know that. But as a judge, you can't pre-decide cases, or else you could be asked to remove yourself from that case, and that would defeat the purpose of being able to protect those very rights we're talking about.
Your campaign website said we are stuck in a, quote, criminal justice system that needs reform. What type of change?
Oh, there's all kinds of changes that we need. I mean, we definitely have to address some big issues facing our state. We have juvenile justice reform that we're starting to work on with putting juveniles closer to home as opposed to housing them at Lincoln Hills, and that's been an ongoing issue. We have an opioid crisis, and up north we have a methamphetamine crisis. And that includes treatment issues and options so that we can treat people instead of just incarcerating them. And we do have mass incarceration, and we need to face our issues and move forward, figure out ways to really resolve some of the issues that we're facing.
As a Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge, you have a unique perspective. We lead the nation in the incarceration of African Americans. What could be done about that? Well,
we need to be coming up with, as I'm talking about things, I think the drug treatment court's a perfect example. That's the best one that comes to mind. It's something that we have implemented in Milwaukee County and other counties as well, and it really is a means by which we can treat someone, give them options, give them chances to be in the community and get better, to be productive in the community, as opposed to just turning toward incarceration. And we need to come up with other options at times that we can do those and give those second chances whenever we can.
Your website also says guns, drugs, and gangs are devastating our community. Let me ask about guns. Do we need tougher gun laws?
Well, I'm not the legislature, and that is the distinction between my job and that of the legislature. What we need to do is make sure the people who are prohibited from having guns are treated in our courts when they do have guns, are treated the way we want them to be, which is that there has to be a response. I mean, I was in a gun court. Where there were shootings, there were felons in possession of a firearm. If you're going to violate the law in a way that is dangerous to the community, you have to be held accountable. And that's something that part of my job as a judge is to look out for community safety.
Your thoughts, you mentioned the opioid and heroin crisis and methamphetamine. Your thoughts on how we could make some progress on that epidemic?
Well, we need more resources. We need more money up front in dealing with some of these issues. I know that one of the issues has already been addressed, which is trying to decrease the prescription amounts of prescriptions being read, the volume, correct. We were at one of the higher volumes in terms of that. I know that now doctors are getting involved, and I think it's a lot about education. I mean, it really is. It's an understanding of the problem, the severity of the problem, and how we can educate people so that we can address the problem head on
Do you support the petition for what's been called a civil Gideon, where the poor, low income would have access in civil cases, eviction, child support, things like that?
Absolutely.
Who would pay for that?
Well, that's something we need to obviously think about. I'm not sitting here with budgets in hand, but what I do see in our court is I see people every day representing themselves, and it's very hard. It's a very hard thing to do. We have a criminal justice system. Lawyers go to law school for years. We call it the practice of law. Then you put someone in that situation when they're dealing with something as important as their child, and we expect them to try to be able to do that themselves. I think we need to provide lawyers wherever we can.
At a recent forum with Mr. Burns, you said that only 20% of Wisconsin judges are women. Why?
Well, that's a good question.
Is there institutional barriers, and if so, what are they?
I think that women as a whole, certainly we're at a time right now, I think, where women are actually feeling that we are more empowered and more able to speak out. And we've seen that with the Me Too movement. Yeah. I participated in the Women's March, which was terrific last weekend in Milwaukee County. 1,500 women, I got the opportunity to speak and be introduced by Senator Lena Taylor. And you see now women really taking charge and really stepping up. We do have different challenges. I have 3 children, 3 teenage girls now.
I've seen those pictures on your website. So what have you told them about hashtag Me Too?
Well, I've told them they can be whatever they want to be. And we really are at a time where they can. And for women, we do have the balance. And it is a balance. And it's an important balance. And I love my children and want to be there to raise them. And I balance that with my work. And it's something that is just a different challenge than it is for men. And we need to acknowledge that. But women also can recognize that we can step up and we can be at the table too. And we're starting to do that. And I'm proud of that. We have work to do, though. Only 1 in 5 judges across our state are women.
You've heard the argument that collegiality on the court is not so important as long as the court hears cases and makes decisions. How important is collegiality?
I think collegiality is important. I would say, I don't know if this is your circumstance, but if you sit down at your Thanksgiving table or your Christmas table or whatever with your family, there may be family members that you don't agree with politically. You're still able to share your meal and to have conversation, and I think it's important. You don't have to, it doesn't mean bowing down and backing down on principles and values, which I hold dear. What it means is being able to talk to each other, and right now we've got a court that can't even talk to each other.
The court voted to close administrative hearings. Your feelings on that? Should they be open?
I think they should. We had a great tradition in our state of transparency in government, something we should all want. And that transparency was taken away right after those reserve judges put forward the petition to have a recusal rule heard by the court in those rule hearings. And then the court had those rule hearings go dark.
Okay. And Chief Justice Rogenzak asked for, in the current state budget, she asked for pay raises of up to 16% for judges. Do judges like you need a pay raise?
And you're asking a tough question, whether I want a pay raise. I mean, I didn't go into this work for the money. I didn't. I went into public service because I care, because I love the people of our state, and I want to serve the community. And I've been in public service my entire career. We do need to make sure that we attract people that are able to do the job, but as far as what I get paid, I'm here because I care, and I'm doing this job every day for justice for the people of the state of Wisconsin.
But having been a judge for 10 years, you can answer this question. Are we losing our best and brightest because they're able to earn more elsewhere?
I do see a movement that I will say that comes out of our prosecutor's office and our public defender's office. And we have excellent attorneys in both of those offices. I have personally witnessed those individuals, some of the best and brightest, because they had a family to support and they had bills from law school debt to leave those offices. So I think to some extent we need to acknowledge that we need great people working within our public sector to make sure that the work of justice is done.
Let's circle back to your comments about Mr. Burns. He is taking a position on the most controversial issues out there. Why is that bad? Do you think it would mean that he couldn't sit on some very, very important potential cases?
Yes, I think it means he may not be able to sit on these potential cases. He is reaching decisions on potential legislation that is potentially going to come in front of the Supreme Court. He is engaging in Twitter with representatives, Republican elected officials, and I do think that those are issues that he could have to face.
I want to ask you about something that just happened. The Republican Party put out this press release, and you're probably aware of it. This is the Republican Party's words, not mine. Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate and liberal activist Judge Rebecca Dallet handed down a weak sentence to a man for sexual assault of a child. Dallet gave a sentence of only 2 years in prison when she could have given the man up to 30 years. Again, that's the Republican Party's press release, not mine. This is a 2011 case. I want to give you a chance to respond, please.
Well, my response to that is that, first of all, the facts are always much more complex and complicated, as is the law. And I don't know what the Republican Party knows about being a judge, probably not very much. And I know that Judge Skrenak's only been a judge for a very short time, and Mr. Burns hasn't been one at all. I've been a judge for almost 10 years, and I've worked in some tough places, and I've had to make the very tough decisions. The cases are complicated, the facts are complicated, and they involve lots of issues, like whether a victim could even testify in a case and whether the state believed they could even prove the case with that fact. And I am the one who's been doing this work, the hard work, not judging it from a corporate boardroom or from other offices. I do the hard work every day, and I do it well, and that's why judges across the state are supporting me.
Do you remember this case enough to respond to it, Your Honor?
I remember the case. There's a statement in the paper by the district attorney who served in the case, who talked a little bit about that case, that a little bit about the facts behind it, that the individual was extremely physically ill, extremely mentally ill, that involved a family member, that it, first of all, it was an attempted sexual assault, and it wasn't 30 years. That's an inaccurate number. That's since been corrected by Patrick Marley, and it's in the paper now. And that was a situation where the state did not know if they could prove the case given the circumstances surrounding the case. And so they were very satisfied with the outcome, as was the family and the victim's family. So that was a situation. And I would also add that is not a 2-year sentence. That was a 7-year sentence. It was 2 years of initial confinement and 5 years of extended supervision for a very ill, mentally ill 66-year-old man.
Okay. Thank you for dealing with that. Your website talks about your experience before you became a judge. You were a prosecutor. Lessons from that side of the bench?
Yes, I prosecuted sexual predators, so I have a lot of experience in that, and that's tough work as well. I prosecuted sexual predators in 3 counties, mostly Milwaukee County and Washington County, and also was over at the U.S. Attorney's Office as well, prosecuting cases, and I prosecuted domestic violence and child abuse. And I would say that the work I've done there and the work I've done as a judge in some very tough courts, such as homicide, sexual assault, and domestic violence, is work really standing up for victims, empowering victims, making sure the vulnerable are heard and everyone's rights are protected.
The issues in Milwaukee County are somewhat different. You said you've been around the state campaigning. What are you hearing about some of these issues in rural Wisconsin and western Wisconsin?
Well,
please?
and that is the opportunity of running. And I've run before and been elected before in an open contested race in Milwaukee County. But the value to a campaign like this is the opportunity to go everywhere and listen. And so I have heard some of the issues. People are concerned about the opioid crisis. They are concerned about water issues. They are concerned about environment. They are concerned about their schools. The economy has hit, I think, to the north a little bit harder than the rest of us. And these are things I can actually see. And so that is a value to moving around the state and actually talking to people and hearing what they care about.
Have you made any comments on Foxconn that would have you step off that case if there was any lawsuit filed on Foxconn?
No, I've, as I said, I've been very open about my values. I think the voters need to know those, but I think that we need to get away from further politicizing our Supreme Court and not taking positions on issues that might come before the court.
Judge Skrenak argued on behalf of upholding Act 10 and upholding the reapportionment map that federal judges have struck down. Are these issues in this race?
They are. I think that Judge Skrenak is someone who is an extremist and who is not going to be able to be fair and impartial on cases. He blocked access to women's clinics that gave health services to women that included abortion services, but they were also screening services and other services. He physically blocked those and had to be physically removed from those on more than one occasion. It was twice, I believe. And he has represented the Republican Party and he has represented Governor Walker. And I think that he is going to be a rubber stamp for those policies that come out of our legislature and for our governor, and that is a problem for the people of our state.
And the Republican Party in its press release calls you a liberal activist. What's your response to that?
My response is I follow the rule of law, and I'm the only candidate that's been doing that for 10 years. The rule of law is something that Judge Skrenak talks a lot about, but it's something that he doesn't follow when it conflicts with his political beliefs.
Oh, okay, maybe a final question. You've outlined some of the differences between you and your two opponents in the, let me get the date right, February 20 primary. Other differences between you?
Well, I think the big difference is experience and values, and I'm the only candidate that brings that. For Mr. Burns, he is someone that works from a corporate boardroom, not the courtroom. He represents corporate clients. He has had only a handful of cases in Wisconsin. He has had very little criminal justice experience. And I think that we need someone, there's too much at stake now to have someone with no experience in this position. And as far as Judge Skrenak goes, as I've said, he is an extremist who is going to be a rubber stamp for our governor and our legislature. He says that Justice Gableman is someone he wants to be like, someone who ran one of the most unethical campaigns in our state's history for electing Supreme Court justices, and someone who was a rubber stamp for his political allies.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Rebecca Dallet is one of 3 candidates for the seat, the 10-year term on the state Supreme Court. The primary is February 20th. The April 3rd general election is, the general election is April 3rd. Your Honor, a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.